Miles, I know it's just we come back to small arms, but I'm just so curious. What is the function of SEALs then, or the difference between Navy SEALs and Marines then?
The SEALs are actually a component of the Naval Special Warfare Command.
Oh, okay.
And Naval Special Warfare Command, NSW, Naval Special Warfare, NSW is actually a broader command that the SEALs are a component of. I believe there's SWIC, which are the SEAL delivery teams for the boats that they use. Then there's intelligence assets and all sorts of other things. But they fulfill a completely different mission set. They fulfill a very small mission set of mostly direct action raids on enemy or terrorist combatants. So what that means is, the SEALs are entirely direct action focused. You use them to hit a target very hard, very fast. They go in, they do their little thing in teams of, I don't know, 5 or 10 or 15. They do that and then they go back out, right? Whereas, Army Special Forces, for example, they have that direct action capability, but in the Army, Special Operations has more of that long-term working clandestinely, working with espionage, working with guerrillas, with local forces, with partnering up. It's a different mission set entirely from what the SEALs are. The SEALs are not going to be asked to train the ANA, and the Army Special Forces is not going to be asked to take out bin Laden, as an example. Except in the case of that very high profile raid, except in the case of CAG, right, which is Combat Applications Group, which is the Army's elite direct action unit.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing your information with us and your knowledge. Just back to Afghan military. So you also trained them how to use these weapon systems, of course. I mean, what else, right? These small arms. And how long I know how long, it's all very individual, but how long would it take in general for these guys to learn, to be trained to use these small arms systems you give them?
Boot camp for the ANA basic training, I believe, is like 4 to 5 weeks. It's not long. There's actually even a reading component of basic training to teach a lot, because a lot of these guys who are enlisting in the ANA, a lot of them are illiterate, and they come from these illiterate Afghan peasant backgrounds, farmer backgrounds, and so there's actually a literacy component of the training. And then afterwards, the guys that go in the infantry, they go through a little bit more extended periods of time. Time on the weapon systems, they probably get. So for me in particular, what my unit did in my second deployment, it was called the Tolai Advising Team. And we actually worked with the Afghan Kandak, which was the company that was in charge of taking over security at the base that we were at, Camp Bastion Leatherneck Shrobak. And so we actually didn't do much small arms training with them, that unit in particular. The one reason why we didn't do that was because of the green on blue attacks that the Taliban were infiltrating the ANA. So for us to be in the same location with the ANA with loaded weapons in a training scenario, it was actually like one of these ridiculous things. Like, we're supposed to go to war, with these guys, but yet we can't even be in the same compound with them. And when they have loaded weapons and then we have loaded weapons, because there's a chance that they'd start shooting us, right? If there's an insider attack or insider threat. And this is just one of the complexities of the Afghan campaign. It's just like this insider threat. You're worried about your own allies shooting you in the back. And it happened on our deployment There's one ANA guy who just like went nuts on this American contractor, just like pulled his AK on him, and the American contractor was running away. And we had these guardian angels of these American Marines from my unit. They just opened up on this guy and they just riddled him. But that's why they were there, was for that insider threat. You actually had to have like guys on security and towers looking down at the training area, you know, because the insider threat was so bad at that point. And it was interesting because I remember in 2011 or 2012, you know, this actually wasn't a secret. The Taliban actually like announced this, and they said, we are going to make achieving insider threats one of our chief tactics, one of our moves, tactical moves. They actually announced this, and we knew about this. So, and then it started, you know, happening as across various different bases. Either guys that the Taliban had influenced or coerced or paid, or were actual, you know, Taliban guys in captured ANA uniforms. But more often of the time, it was more like ANA guys who are sort of like on the edge and didn't like the partnered forces they were dealing with. And it didn't take much for, you know, if there was a Taliban informant or spy or whatever to say like, hey, you know, like, you know, you don't like the guys, the Americans are mistreating you or something, like, why don't you, you know, we'll pay your family a little bit extra or something if you can just wipe out your team that you're dealing with tomorrow. And a lot of the times, and sometimes they didn't even need that. You just had really just disgruntled, pissed off Afghan Army officers and men who just didn't like the particular American advising team that they were with. And they just smoked them all, you know, and they were just like, I've had enough of you guys, kind of thing. So,
and
it's a crazy aspect of the war.
Yeah, of course. Did I understand you correctly that they use also AK-47?
Yeah, because in that particular case, I don't know why that guy was using that AK for some reason. As I recall, it was an AK. It might not have been. But the Afghan Army did use the AK before the U.S. military started really rearming the Afghan Army. So the entire ANA actually did use AKs. Did use Soviet-era weapon systems left over from the 1980s war and from the Civil War in the early 2000s. They were entirely armed with them. But then the U.S. sort of flipped that script, and then they armed them everything else with the U.S. stuff. So as an example, I had one of my buddies commented, like, yeah, I went on a patrol with the ANA, and I looked at their 249, their saw, and his 249 was newer than mine. And it was like, why is this the case? Aren't we supposed to be giving them our old stuff, not brand new stuff? You know, so yeah. And that is the case with a misconception, like when you see Afghan Army weapons today and Afghan police weapons in Kabul, which are all M16A4s, some people can think that, oh, those are probably surplus US M16A4s. No, those are brand new M16A4s made specifically for the Afghan Army and the Afghan police.
And okay, before we go to Afghan police, does American Army or Marines, I know because many people on this are going to laugh. I know. I said, what about modern warfare? Do they use any knives, or do they carry any military knives or any bayonets?
Yeah, I have a great story for you. On my first deployment, when we deployed, we checked out our bayonets. They're called called the Ontario Knife Company, the OKNK or something. But the Ontario Knife Company, not based in Ontario, Canada. It's an American company. They made these bayonets for our M16s and M27s. And we checked them out of the armory when we went to deploy to Afghanistan. We walked over to our squad leader, and I think later on in country, we walked over to our squad leader, and we gave them our bayonets, and they sat in a bag until the end of the deployment. And then when we went back to the US, he gave them the bayonets back and we checked them back into the armory, back in country. So that's what happened to our bayonets.
Because there was no use for them, right?
No, yeah, there was one, no use for them. Two, if we lost a bayonet, that's a serialized item. Well, it's not serialized, but it's an armory issued item. So if you lose it, you might as well have lost a weapon or a night vision goggle or whatever. It's that bad. In that, the whole company is issued bayonets, a certain amount, and they have to return them. And so that's a very serious problem. If you lose a bayonet, it's very, very serious. And that's why that squad leader was like, no, I'm not taking my chances with you guys and your bayonets and losing them at the end of deployment. They're all going in this bag and I'm going to give them back to you at the end, so that's exactly what happened. But it's interesting because I often thought, because there were so many times when we probably could have really used bayonets more as a crowd control measure. And I've often wondered, when we were on vehicle control points or crowd control kind of thing, but mostly vehicle control where we have to search people and cars and stuff, like a bayonet actually would have served us useful in a lot of circumstances, and having a less lethal capability if we really needed it. I mean, there's a difference between if I prod someone with a muzzle than if I prod someone with a knife. It's just kind of that added factor. But I don't know, it just was never a thing. There was, in the Battle of Fallujah, there were Marines with bayonet mounted rifles, and they did fight with bayonets mounted on their rifles. In 2006, the famous battle, Operation Phantom Fury, Marines actually did fight with mounted bayonets. But the use of the bayonet has been very declining in recent years. And in fact, though, and it's actually this constant argument even within the military. It's like, why do we even issue bayonets? We never use them, or why do we do this? But we still train with them in boot camp. We still get them issued in the military. But there's actually this comment when there's a big shooting in the US, and President Obama said, we don't need battleships, horses, or bayonets anymore. And the entire Marine Corps to a man, took to Facebook and posted these memes of just like the funny things like, oh, we don't use bayonets anymore. So what's this picture of recruits in Paris Island yesterday training with bayonets on their M16s, and it was just like this really odd thing. It's like Obama really shouldn't have said bayonets in that speech. He should have picked some other archaic weapon system we don't use. He should have said spears or something, because we all got really angry that Obama was like, we don't use bayonets anymore. And we were like, but we do use bayonets. But on my deployment, we stuck them all in a bag and never touched them. And it's like, this weird contradiction. We do use bayonets, but where were they on your deployment? In a bag underneath our squad leader's rack. I don't know. So.
And are you allowed, were Marines allowed to take any knife with them instead of bayonets, their personal knife, or it was not allowed?
Oh, of course. Of course, we all had personal knives. I think every Marine in my platoon had 1, 2, or 3 personal knives and Leatherman and multi-tools. We all had them, of course. But there's a difference between the bayonet and the knife, right? Because a personal knife that you'd carry on your uniform or your body or something like that, that only takes up like this amount, right?
Yes.
A bayonet is long, is super huge. A bayonet is humongous. Like the bayonets that we have, they're huge. They're like this big, and they come in this huge, sheath, and it's plastic, and it's huge. It's like, you gotta deal with that thing on patrol. And some guys would do dumb things. if I saw a Marine wearing a bayonet on patrol, my first thought would be, what an idiot. You know, it's like, I can accomplish the same thing you're trying to accomplish with this, you know, knife in my pocket right here. In terms of everything that we need to do, it's like, we're not fighting with that thing. You're not going to cut some crazy wire or thing down that you can't do with a personal knife, or that you can't do with any other tool you have at your disposal. It's like, we've got wire cutters and breaching tools in our backpacks and trucks that we can do that with. You know, you're not accomplishing anything with a bayonet that you can't do with any other tool that we already have, kind of thing. So, but there were some guys who actually carried axes and machetes, like crazy things like that. But that was more of a status thing. It's like, yeah, look at the squad leader with an axe, you know.
I understand. What about Afghan police? What kind of small arms did they use?
The Afghan police, at the times that I was dealing with them in 2011, had all Soviet weaponry. The PKM medium machine gun, which the PKM machine gun is absolutely, it is a fantastic medium machine gun. It really does, it fills that very nice balance of the difference between weight and reliability, the trade-off between weight and reliability and effectiveness. And it really fills that nicely as compared to our M240, which was very heavy compared to the PKM, but it was very accurate. But I mean, it's that perfect trade-off of what you really need. Do you need to be very accurate, or do you need to walk 20 miles and then be somewhat accurate? I mean, I don't know. You could go on all day with that. But the Afghan police had PKMs, and the PKMs were they were well done. They had for their AKs, which the U.S. sort of bought in various ways, and you had a various make and configuration. You had fake ones from Pakistan. You had real ones. You had the Hungarians. You had Russians. You had mixed in there Chinese ones as well. All this stuff left over from the Civil War and stuff sort of filtering from the collapse of the Soviet Union, and then surplus stuff that the U.S. bought and then brought in as well. So that sort of mix mash. And then you had the RPGs, which was one commonality that they had with the ANA. And then you had what else did they have? You actually had a weapon system known as a GP30, which is unique because that's one of the few weapon systems that you see much more of in Afghanistan than you do in Iraq. Whereas, with the PKM and the AK pattern rifles and the RPGs, these are fairly standard in between Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, both insurgencies and local forces had these weapon systems organic to them, right? The Iraqi police and army both at various times had the PKM medium machine gun. They had, an AK patterned weapon system. Whether what country that was from, it was to be debated. They both had RPGs. But the GP30 and the GP28 was something that was unique to the Afghan theater, in that the GP30 was this grenade launcher that's about this size, and it shoots these golf ball badminton size grenades that are about this big. And it's actually quite useful because it's a small little thing that's like this big, and you literally just stick the grenade in from the muzzle and then pull it off safe, and then fire the trigger, and then the entire grenade gets shot out the front. As compared to our grenade launcher, the US grenade launcher, the M203, which was about twice the size. It was twice the size in length. It was about that big. You had a shell that could get jammed in the chamber afterwards, and you had to press a button to unleash it and then push it down. It had a very simple safety mechanism, which the GP30 had as well. but and you know, in terms of actual accuracy and effectiveness, our 40 millimeter was more effective than GP30 in terms of range and capability. Downrange, I believe our 203 had you know, had probably a little bit larger explosive radius and shrapnel and stuff. We could do more with our 203 in that we could shoot smoke, we could shoot white star clusters, we could shoot elimination rounds. That the GP30, the ammunition that they had at the time in the 2000s that we were working with, they didn't really have that capability. They could really just shoot high explosive. But in terms of high explosive versus high explosive, their GP30 offered a lot in terms of weight reduction in size, because it was this very small, it was much smaller, and there was no shell left over. And you could just stick it on the front of an AK. You could stick it on the front of an AK in a stock configuration, which was very important. The 203, you couldn't do that. You had to modify the weapon system somehow. With a little nut that they had at the end, you had to take off the handguard. So I don't know, pros and cons of both.
Very interesting. Before we move on to the last, the small arms used by Taliban, I would like to ask you something. Have you been issued, I know it sounds very strange. I mean, so why is he asking this crazy question? Any pistols?
I was only issued handguns in a administrative capability in the United States. I mean, there was one time in my service where I was issued a handgun, and that was because I was escorting weapons from one base to another, and I was issued a handgun for that explicit purpose.